Hey, how you doing?
Hi, how are you? We're from Sky News from the UK. Presumably we're not allowed over there.
As Hurricane Milton approaches, people have been told to get out of
If you want a president who won't even try to save you when the floodwaters are rising, vote for Kamala. She's not
Former President Trump, get a life, man. Help these people.
You're not going anywhere, you tell me.
5 years ago, God put on my heart Tampa Bay and get a boat. And that's what I'm doing.
And there are now 20 states with Trump abortion bans. You're telling a survivor of a crime of a violation to their body they don't have a right to make a decision about what happens to their body next?
They can vote. Ballots drop today. The election starts today.
Hello and welcome to USA 2024 on the road. It's Friday, and that means you join our team here in the United States as we count down to the presidential election just over 3 weeks from now. Martha, where are you today?
I'm inside a car trying to keep cool in the absurdly hot October temperatures of Phoenix, Arizona. I'm outside an abortion clinic waiting to go in and interview a doctor.
Mark, you and I, we're not very far apart, are we?
Quite right, yeah. I'm just up the road from you in St Petersburg, Florida, covering the latest storm to hit this country.
Have you been on the hurricane diet, Haribo, for breakfast, lunch and dinner?
Well, funny enough, I've got some Haribo right here next to me. So, yes is the answer to that, James.
Such a cliche. This is USA 2024 on the road with me, James Matthews in Sarasota, Florida.
Me, Martha Kelner, in Phoenix, Arizona.
And me, Mark Stone, in St Petersburg, Florida.
We'll talk more about Hurricane Milton later on, but first, of course, to the election. Martha, Arizona is the focus of political campaigns this week, yeah?
It is, James. We're now 27 days away from Election Day, which is kind of scary. I feel like we're running out of time. So God knows how the campaigns must be feeling at the moment. But voting officially underway in Arizona, which is one of the 7 key battleground states. And Arizona has only recently become so important. It was reliably Republican, but in 2020, Joe Biden was a surprise victor here. It was a narrow win for him by just 10,000 votes, and it will be incredibly close, the polls suggest, this time round as well. It is, like many other of the battleground states, on a knife edge at the moment. Donald Trump has a slight edge, according to the polls, but it's well within the margin of error. And so the candidates and their surrogates have descended on Arizona this week. Kamala Harris was here for a rally on Thursday night. Her running mate Tim Walz is in town. J.D. Vance too. We're expecting Donald Trump here on Sunday. So certainly all eyes in the political world on Arizona this week.
Yeah, just explain early voting for us. Why is it offered in most states?
It kind of does what it says on the tin. Anyone of voting age can vote early in Arizona, either via a mail-in ballot or they can turn up at one of these voting centres early. It has been slightly controversial in the past. Donald Trump says it opens up this whole system to electoral fraud, but it means that if people are not around on November the 5th, or if they want to avoid the crowds on that day, then they can do.
Yeah, getting the word out that they can vote. Ballots drop today. The election starts today. And making sure that people know, because a lot of folks, like I said, they're busy.
I went out canvassing one evening this week with Quante, who's a Democratic state representative, just as the sun was starting to set on the suburbs of Phoenix, just as the temperature was starting to get something approaching bearable. There were families out in their front gardens playing, lots of the houses decorated in Halloween paraphernalia.
226 and work our way east. Okay. I loved all the signs and stuff, and I also felt like this is a neighborhood that I personally have not touched yet. So that's why we're over here.
Okay, this is a good sign, though.
Oh, yeah. I said, oh, my goodness.
You were in Maricopa County. Tell me, why is that important?
Well, we talk a lot, don't we, about key swing states, but what about those key counties? And Maricopa County is one of those. Whoever wins Arizona, whether it be Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, they'll have to go through Maricopa County. It's home to more than 60% of the population. It's home to the state capital, the biggest city, Phoenix. And it's also home to a number of different key demographic groups which could decide this election. It's got a large Latino population. It has a large population of suburban women. And specifically to this election cycle, it's also home to a large population of moderate Republicans, Republicans that the Democratic Party believe they can entice away from Donald Trump.
There we go. Hi, I'm Representative Quante Cruz. I represent our area, and we're out here canvassing and informing neighbors that ballots dropped today. I don't know if you're voting by mail by chance?
Yeah.
Awesome. We're canvassing about Proposition 139. Are you familiar with Prop 139?
Doesn't ring a bell.
The Prop 139 is regarding abortion access and allowing health care when women need to make those decisions with their doctors.
So we're asking folks to vote yes on that?
As well as voting for their favoured presidential candidate, people here in Arizona have the option to vote on whether to enshrine the right to choose abortion in the state constitution. And this is because when Roe versus Wade, the constitutional right to choose, was overturned in June 2022, it awoke laws in some states which had lain dormant for many years. In Arizona's case, it was this 1864 Civil War era law which banned abortion with almost no exceptions in the case of rape or incest. That law has since been repealed here. There is now a slightly less restrictive 15-week abortion ban. But while the law's been appealed, the fear that people have, that women have of their rights being eroded very much remains.
Bodily autonomy. The thing about body autonomy when it comes to being a black woman is that there was a time when African Americans were enslaved here in the U.S. and we had no body autonomy at all. Someone decided everything for you. When you had a child, when you mated with someone, when you went to sleep, when you ate, everything was controlled. And so I don't support anything that strips any human being of their human right and their right to their own body.
When you say that to people, do you find them more receptive?
I do. And when I talk to voters about the 1864 abortion ban, and I share with them, in 1864 I would have been considered not a person. Mm-hmm. That makes it real for them because this is very dangerous, the times that we're in, and we can't afford to go back.
I just found that argument from Quante so compelling, and I think I could hear, the people on the other side of her door knocking. They found it quite convincing too. She says she's had some luck even winning round moderate Republicans based on that argument, but not everyone here is convinced. One thing I've been struck by is that some women here, despite being fierce advocates for reproductive rights, despite believing in the right to choose abortion, they're still voting for Donald Trump, a man who had a major hand in overturning Roe versus Wade. This is a woman called Kate, a nurse who had just come out of the polling booth having voted early for Donald Trump. And did you vote for Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020 as well?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And is abortion a factor for you at all? I know abortion's a flashpoint in this state.
Well, I'm a nurse, so I have my own opinions on that. I just think it's a woman's right to choose. I'm pro-choice, so.
So pro-choice, but still voting for Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel conflicted about that at all? Or?
Nope. Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. Because I've been a nurse and it's always been about danger to the mother or child. Mm-hmm. So that hasn't changed too much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, ma'am. What's your name, please?
Abortion, Martha, has been a key issue. It's one that you've covered extensively in this election. Kamala Harris has appeared on the popular podcast that goes by the name of Call Her Daddy to discuss abortion and other key women's issues.
At a rally in Pennsylvania, former President Trump recently told women, "You will be protected and I will be your protector." What do you make of that?
So he who, when he was president, hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. And they did just as he intended. And there are now 20 states with Trump abortion bans. including bans that make no exception for rape or incest, which we just discussed, which means that you're telling a survivor of a crime of a violation to their body they don't have a right to make a decision about what happens to their body next, which is immoral. This is the same guy that is now saying that. This is the same guy who said that women should be punished for having abortions.
Of all the podcasts to go on, why this one, Martha, I wonder? Why is it so significant?
I think it's quite simple, James. I think it comes down to reach and the specifics of the demographics she's trying to target. Call Her Daddy was actually set up by a woman named Alex Cooper, the host. And traditionally, it's been a place where women discuss stories about sex. That is the space that it occupies. But it is the second biggest podcast on Spotify. It's the most listened to by women. 75% of those listeners are women under the age of 35. So I think it's part of her really aggressive push to try and capture that vote of women aged 18 to 24 who may not be engaged in political discussion but may well be listeners to the Call Her Daddy podcast. It was slightly excruciating at times, though, because you heard Kamala Harris referring to the fans of this podcast. They're called the Daddy Gang, and she was clearly didn't come very naturally to her appealing to the Daddy Gang, but that's exactly what she did. People will do very strange things to try and win an election.
Yeah, got to try and stop myself making daddy jokes at that one, Martha. Don't worry about it. That was the first of a number of media appearances for Harris this week. She was interviewed by Howard Stern, by 60 Minutes, and Stephen Colbert.
Now, we asked ahead of time, because I can't just be giving a drink to the Vice President of the United States without asking. You asked for Miller High Life. You asked Miller High Life. I'm just curious.
You just said, too, you're going to put a Republican in your cabinet. Correct. I love that. Yeah. That's old school.
Listen, I know, and I've been a decision maker long enough to know that the best decisions I make are when I bring in a variety of perspectives.
You are sitting here with us. Mm-hmm. The Trump campaign canceled an interview that they had agreed to. What do you make of that?
If he is not going to give your viewers the ability to have a meaningful, thoughtful conversation, question and answer with you, then watch his rallies. You're going to hear conversations that are about himself and all of his personal grievances. And what you will not hear is anything about you, the listener.
Am I correct?
I got to win, Howard. I got to win.
You got to win.
You got to win.
Ooh. That tastes like the beautiful city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Champagne and beers.
There you go.
This is Harris's last push to voters. She seems to be trying to reach out to as many people as she can, performing across a range of platforms.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, even on the Democrat side, have been concerned about the lack of media interviews that Kamala Harris has been doing. Well, all that changed this week, although she's been very specific in which interviews she's chosen to do. And I think it's interesting that all of those media outlets that you've mentioned have very specific, very different reaches. Her 60 Minutes interview, for example, was supposed to be a more serious interview, which is clearly important for a campaign which has been plagued by accusations that it's less about policy and more about vibes. On Colbert, however, it's clear that Harris was trying to show a more human side. She, at one point, pops open a beer, a Miller High Life, which she calls the champagne of beers, and she talks about how the last time she had a beer was going to the baseball with Doug, referring to her husband, Doug Emhoff. So she's almost trying in that interview to appear as one of the lads. That is clearly an attempt to target the male demographic.
Yeah, tell me you're not a beer drinker without telling me you're not a beer drinker.
Exactly.
Mark, let's bring you in here. How do you see that?
Yeah, I think what she's trying to do is to go to where the voters are, inserting herself into their worlds, wherever those worlds may be. She can't, and nor indeed can Donald Trump, can't rely only on talking to those that she thinks are already won over. And so I think it was savvy that in the last 24 hours, she popped up on the Weather Channel. doing a live phone interview. She knew that lots of people would be watching the Weather Channel, especially down here in Florida. Plenty of them not Democrats. And so I think that was a smart, canny move.
I think it was very smart in terms of reach. I think doing the Call Her Daddy podcast was very smart. I think doing the 60 Minutes interview was very smart and appeared even smarter in hindsight with the knowledge that Donald Trump had rejected the invitation to appear on 60 Minutes. He said that they were too concerned about fact checking. So I think the reach is smart. I think there were some questions that she still didn't answer adequately.
She was on The View, which is an ABC program with Whoopi Goldberg and others. It's kind of like America's Answer to Loose Women, but much more sophisticated. No offense to the Loose Women team, but it's a better watch, I think. And she was asked a really direct question. She was asked if she could name one thing that she would have done differently from President Biden
during the past 4 years.
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
That was an opportunity for her to find some light between her and the Biden campaign, something she's really struggled to do because she is literally the vice president. And she couldn't answer it. She couldn't think of one thing that she would have done differently. Which I think was telling and it was a problem. And it was obviously seized upon by the Trump team. And they said, well, hang on, we could think of a few things. Of course they can. Now, was that intentional or was it because she's not massively agile in these live interviews? I'd say it was the latter.
Yeah, she doesn't lack support acts in this final push. Former President Barack Obama, he's coming out to help. Last night, he appeared for the first time since the Democratic National Convention in Pittsburgh in support of Harris.
And the good news is Kamala Harris is ready to do the job. This is a leader who has spent her life fighting on behalf of people who need a voice and a chance. Somebody who was raised in the middle class, who worked a summer job at McDonald's while she earned a degree, who believes in the values that built this country. Somebody who has served with distinction in every office that she has ever held. Kamala is as prepared for the job as any nominee for president has ever been. That's who Kamala is.
Former President Bill Clinton, he'll be hitting the campaign trail this weekend in support of Kamala Harris. What impact, Mark, do you think this will have on voters?
I don't know. This is an interesting one. I mean, he is an elder statesman of the Democratic Party. He'll appeal to an older generation of Democrats for sure. He was a key speaker at the Democratic Party convention a couple of months ago, Kamala Harris's crowning moment. I mean, he's a real orator, no question. Those that meet him say he has an electric energy. So you can imagine if she's going to be doing smaller campaigns in these next few weeks, more intimate campaigns, and Bill Clinton is there, then maybe that electric energy will shine through. But he's elderly now. I mean, I felt that his speech at the DNC, which we were both at, it was lackluster. It wasn't the Bill Clinton of old. And remember, this is a guy with so much of his own baggage. Lewinsky, remember that. You know, his appeal is limited. He isn't Barack Obama. And I think maybe that's the reason we're not going to see all that much of him.
Okay, let's take a break for a moment. Martha, I know you have to leave us, yeah?
Yeah, we've got to rush off. Our producer, Sarah, has set up some filming here inside an abortion clinic. So keen not to keep the doctor waiting, as it were. But yeah, let's speak next week.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I look forward to it. So that's us for part one. We'll be back in part two. We'll take a look at the politics of the weather and how misinformation has been driving the conversation. Welcome back to USA 2024 on the road. While Martha has been in Arizona, Mark and I have been down in Florida covering Hurricane Milton, a record-setting hurricane that hit Western Florida this week. A lot of the drama, however, occurred in the weeks before Milton's arrival in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, or Helene as the Americans term it. Donald Trump waded in.
Kamala wined and dined in San Francisco, and all of the people in North Carolina, no helicopters, no rescue. It's just what's happened there is very bad. They're offering them $750 to people whose homes have been washed away.
He encouraged claims and created a disinformation that has gathered a head of steam. Mark, tell us about these claims, these rumours. Who are they targeted at, do you think?
Donald Trump has been at the heart of a lot of misinformation, and it begun after the last hurricane, Helene, as you say, where Trump was suggesting that the federal agencies, FEMA as it's known, were somehow blocking aid from getting into the worst areas of that hurricane, especially up in North Carolina, where I was last week. It wasn't true. There was no factual evidence that FEMA was in any way blocking aid getting in. Quite the contrary, they were doing an awful lot to get aid in, and it was damaging.
Let me ask you this. I haven't introduced myself. I'm Mark.
Richard Bassett.
Nice to meet you. Let me just ask you, how was last night for you? Do you live locally?
No, I'm up. I do live locally, but we didn't get a lot where I'm at. So I consider myself very lucky.
Look, the damage here. I mean, you're a local. I'm not. It doesn't look to be as bad as people had feared.
Well, when you get the news in with it, they exaggerate like crazy. This one was supposed to wipe out everything, but it didn't. So we're good.
An element of crying wolf, maybe? The authorities saying...
They always cry wolf. You cannot trust the news or the government. That's all I can tell you.
Oh, look, we've got to politics more quickly than I thought we might. But since you brought it up, let me ask you. I mean,
you can't get out of politics. Politics is here. You just can't listen to them. My sisters were trying to get me to leave. You got to leave. You got to do this. I said, I'm going to stick. I've been through 3 of them already, and it hasn't even been on my street. We haven't had water on my street. They charge us for flood insurance anyway, but it's never flooded.
Yeah.
I don't intend to pay flood insurance anymore.
Yeah.
That's it for me.
Well, look,
That's
Richard,
it for me.
It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm glad you're...
President Biden was visibly angry in the Oval Office just after Helene, and angry again today.
For the last few weeks, there's been a reckless, irresponsible, and relentless promotion of disinformation and outright lies that are disturbing people. It's undermining confidence in the incredible rescue and recovery work that has already been taken and will continue to be taken. Former President Trump has led the onslaught of lies. Assertions have been made that property is being confiscated. That's simply not true. They're saying people impacted by these storms will receive $750 in cash and no more. That's simply not true. Now the claims are getting even more bizarre. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, a congresswoman of Georgia, is now saying the federal government is literally controlling the weather. We're controlling the weather. It's beyond ridiculous. It's got to stop.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, congresswoman from Georgia, influential within her own circles, certainly, but very much a conspiracy theorist and not someone that many people pay a great deal of attention to, but a proportion of people do. And onto social media she came earlier this week with a tweet which said, yes, they can control the weather. And she added, it's ridiculous for anyone to lie and say it can't be done. It's not clear who she means by they, but I mean that got gasps because it is an extraordinary statement to make, especially in the middle of 2 hurricanes hitting the country. I should say that I used to live in Beijing, and it is true that to an extent, some weather phenomena can be controlled. Don't worry, I'm not going down a conspiracy theory here, but it is the case that in China, the authorities have got the ability to clear the clouds from the sky and to create blue skies where often there is smog. That is not the same as being able to create a Category 5 hurricane and let that unleash its havoc on Florida. Of course not.
Yeah, she's some player, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Can I tell you my MTG story?
Oh, go on then, James.
A few months ago, David Cameron raised questions about the Republicans, their support for Russia over Ukraine. Marjorie Taylor Greene kind of key among them. So we wanted to ask her the question. I went over to Capitol Hill, went to her desk, and her employee said, no, she's not here, she's at lunch. So we hung around the corridor, and sure enough, the bold Marjorie turned up with press aid in tow. He, with his iPhone in the air, kind of sprinted ahead of her, got behind us, And of course, we asked her a question. She answered a couple of questions, during which she famously said, "David Cameron can kiss my ass," which, that was a soundbite of the day. But we go back to the office to find that her young aide had already tweeted that exchange. So, we were scooped by Marjorie on the kiss my ass quote. So that's the way MTG's media works these days.
And she knew that soundbite of hers would play well to her audience, which is why she got out there even ahead of you, James. If you can do that.
Yeah, scooped again. But to go back to misinformation, hurricanes, how do you think this has impacted FEMA, the emergency organ of the federal government, and their ability to do their work? They're not happy, are they?
No, I mean, I think the statement from the FEMA administrator spells it out. I mean, she said that this is absolutely the worst I have ever seen in terms of conspiracy theories against them. So it's really been difficult for them, I think. But I've also been struck that Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, Republican, Trumpian for a time, of course, has an on-off relationship with Donald Trump. He ran against him in the Republican Party race to be the candidate. But he's certainly Trumpian of a sort, and yet he has been quite clear that he thinks all these conspiracy theories are both nonsense and unhelpful.
We live in an era where if you put out crap online, you can get a lot of people to share it and you can monetize that. That's just the way it is. But if you're hearing something that's just outrageous, just know, in the state of Florida, none of that stuff would ever fly. So you don't have to worry about that.
And Mark, Joe Biden has entered the fray. I do wonder, he will recall and be fully aware of the failures of George W. Bush around Hurricane Katrina in 2005. And he has been vocal, hasn't he, on the subject of the hurricane and misinformation.
Yeah, he has. That 2005 moment was a real low point for George W. Bush. That image of Bush looking out of the aeroplane window as he flew over New Orleans and Katrina, sort of waving out of the plane. It was a disaster for him. Of course, it was a little unfair as well because he couldn't have landed in Katrina because, well, A, the airports were down, but also because a presidential visit into a disaster zone is a distraction and creates a complete nightmare for the emergency teams. And that is why Biden did not initially go to the last hurricane. For Bush, it was a disaster. For Biden, this has been an irritant, to say the least, because of the misinformation.
In every US presidential election, there is always talk about the fabled October surprise, a random, unexpected event that changes the course late in the day of the election. In the past, this surprise has ranged from James Comey's investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails in 2016 to Donald Trump getting COVID in 2020. Mark, I wonder if you think the whole discussion around Hurricanes Milton and Helene might bring about an October surprise this time round.
Well, certainly the first hurricane, Helene, it hit two key swing states, Georgia and North Carolina. And this one has hit a one-time swing state, Florida. And the ongoing relief efforts may affect how people vote. But I'm not sure they are, in the end, going to be October surprises. I'm not sure how much all this misinformation has stuck. At least I don't think it will have swayed very many of the undecideds. I do wonder, though, if the massive pre-storm warnings this time about it being a once-in-a-generation storm, that people will die if they don't evacuate, I wonder if that was in part an overcorrection by the Biden administration. Yes, it could have been a very big storm indeed. And given the barrage of misinformation about them messing up the response to Helene, they absolutely had to be prepared, over-prepared maybe, for this. Had it been a disaster, it would have been an October surprise. It would have been a disaster for Biden/Harris. The storm may not have swirled quite so much down here in Florida, but the politics is swirling for sure, and I think it's going to get much, much more intense.
Great stuff, Mark. Many thanks. And many thanks to you, Martha. And thank you for listening to USA 2024 On the Road. We'll be back next Friday from the campaign trail. Look forward to speaking to you then.
Cheerio.